All right, here we go. Thank you for joining. My name is Alice Gifford, and on behalf of the ATTA, I am pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, part of our educational series for the ATTA community called Meet the Experts. In the series, we focus on current topics with the aim to professionalize our industry and offer specialized advice. We hope that during this current crisis, this content will offer specific ideas that can help to recover and rebuild the adventure travel community of businesses and destinations and professionals from a really wide spectrum of our whole industry. We will record today's webinar and make it available. So if you want to review it again or share it with a coworker, you'll be able to find that inside our member-only hub in a few days, along with a copy of the slides. So if you are a community member and you registered by paying for this webinar, you'll also receive a custom link to get a copy of that recording by email. So look for that. At the end of today's presentation, we will have time for questions and answers from you, our listeners, our participants. So at the bottom of your Zoom window, go ahead and locate that button marked Q&A. You can submit any questions that you have there in writing. You can submit them during the presentation as well, but we'll save them to cover them with our speakers at the end, our experts. You can also use the chat button for discussion or to post comments or questions that the audience can also see. But the Q&A section is where we ask you to put questions for our experts. Thank you so much. And with that, it is my great pleasure to welcome the ATTA's CEO, Mr. Shannon Stoll, who will introduce our presenters and kick off our webinar today. Thanks, Shannon, and welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Alice. And hello, everybody. And we're very happy to be here today with experts. I'm not one of them. I'm here just to introduce and just to thank you all for being a part of ATTA and a part of the webinar today. So the subject today is obviously waivers, and we've got two experts here to talk about some of the why and how waivers work. And that will be Chuni, who I'll introduce in a second here. And then also Brandon will be talking specifically about WaiverSign, which is an ATTA member. Brandon's been a part of the community for, I think, close to 15 years now, maybe longer, maybe before I was with ATTA. And so he has a lot of experience in this space. But the reason that this all came together is that we at the ATTA are looking for opportunities to help our members out, especially during this time of difficulty, which has extended longer than any of us would imagine. And so we will continue to search out opportunities, look for ATTA member-specific benefits that we think will help the community. And so if you have feedback for us on that, of course, we're always open to that. But thank you so much for being a part of today. And with that, I'm going to hand the proverbial mic over to our colleague Chuni Wright, who's an ATTA advisor and has been a member of the community for about a decade now and has seen and done a lot in this space. So Chuni, take it away. Tell us about waivers.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And I am absolutely thrilled today to be here with Shannon, ATTA, and with Brandon to talk about waivers, which is top of mind for so many of you in the industry right now and thinking about how to move forward during this pandemic. So for those of you that don't know me, my background is that I'm a lawyer based in Washington, D.C. I'm barred in California State with clients across the country and abroad. Went to law school at University of California, Berkeley, and undergrad at the University of Texas in Austin. I have a breadth of experience. I've practiced at big law firms, in-house at a trade association, and was a prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Washington, D.C. I've had my own practice for 11 years, and a core practice area is serving as legal counsel to adventure travel companies. That work includes reviewing and drafting liability waivers, as well as advising on risk management issues. I've been an adventure traveler all of my life, and I engage in many adventure activities. I feel that this firsthand knowledge of adventure travel means that I can provide legal advice that takes into account the practical realities of the adventure industry. A couple of disclaimers here. One is that everything I say today is not legal advice. It is not addressing any particular situation. These are just general legal principles. Does not create an attorney-client relationship with anybody that is on the phone that is not currently a client. Talk to your own attorney in your particular country. As Shannon mentioned, I work with ATTA. I also work with WaiverSign, so I do have a relationship with both companies outside of this webinar. Also, my comments today will be US-centric, even though I do work with companies that are abroad. With respect to waiver law, it is based on US principles. It is also not based on specific state practice and protocol. So again, whether you're in the United States or in a different country, it's important that you speak with an attorney in your locale, or for the clients I work with, we will bring in attorneys from a particular state if I need and think that that is something that we need to do. The other thing that is discussed quite often right now during this time is opening the workplace. We are not focused at all on the employment environment in terms of waivers for bringing people back to work. That includes in the travel industry. So we're not going to talk about guides and travel leaders and waivers for your employees. It's really about waivers for participants. And with that, we can move on to the next slide, Brandon. So with respect to general liability waivers, they're also referred to as liability releases, often interchangeably. It's in essence the same thing for our purposes. So we talk about waivers all the time in this industry. And I thought it would be important just to step back and let's talk about what is a liability waiver. In a nutshell, it is a legally binding contract between two parties. In our context, it's between the traveler. It informs them about potential risks that they may face, whether they're inherent risk or risks that you know about, while at the same time releasing the travel company from liability or harm that might arise from ordinary negligence in advance of an incident occurring. These are typically used for circumstances where harm has not occurred yet or may be possible or likely to occur based on events to come. So these are really pre-activity waivers. Before someone goes on a trip, they sign a waiver or liability release. It is a legally binding document to educate your client and protect you at the end of the day. So why use one? Well, I think one reason, it's an obvious one, is that travel companies want to protect themselves from claims or injuries, claims of injuries or damages that arise from financial mishaps or physical mishaps that might happen on a trip. The other reason to use a waiver is that it educates the traveler about the potential risks of a trip while at the same time protecting the travel company. I also believe that as part of educating the traveler, the waiver serves as an important screening tool. It's a good way to figure out if a traveler is really not the right person for a particular trip. While you certainly want as many people as possible to sign book trips, pay for trips, a small percentage of those people may really not be right for that activity. So this is a great vehicle to find out who that might be. The third reason is that if you have insurance, and I certainly hope you do, your insurance company typically gives you a really long form and asks you questions about your business practices, including whether you have a liability waiver. And oftentimes they will require that you have one before they will insure you. So those are the three key reasons. So the bottom line is a liability waiver is an important piece of your risk management program in the adventure space. Traveling itself, as well as participating in an adventure activity, carry their own particular risk. So I think we can go ahead and move on to the next slide, Brandon. So a question I often get is, well, are waivers a waste of time? Are they even legally binding? I will just note here that depends on each state's practices. But here in the United States, in most states, yes, they are legally binding, provided that the traveler agrees to the waiver by signing it and so long as a waiver meets certain conditions. I will make one observation here, which is that U.S. practice is quite different from places like the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has a very specific law around package holidays. And in the UK, tour companies cannot waive ordinary negligence, meaning they can't have people sign agreements that say, well, if I'm hurt as a traveler, I am not going to sue you, travel company, for something that you do that is simple negligence. So in the UK, the idea of a waiver that releases a company from negligent acts is a foreign concept. It's acceptable here in the United States for voluntary activities like adventure travel. Now, with respect to the conditions that must be met, I will also note that courts don't like waivers. They are disfavored because travelers give up a lot of rights by signing waivers. So should you ever happen to be in court one day defending your waiver, the court will scrutinize it. But if you keep these clear principles in mind as you draft a waiver, you'll be in a good position to at least argue that your waiver should be valid. So first, it has to be clear. It should be written for a person of ordinary or average intelligence to understand without getting any additional explanation. So they should know what rights they are giving up. Make it really clear that the parties intend that the traveler gives up these rights. And the language should be very obvious. So you don't want to engage in any, wording that is complicated or that people really don't understand. There will be legal terms in the waiver that people might not understand because they're not lawyers, but as long as they're clear concepts, that is fine. You want the waiver to be conspicuous. It should not be buried. I would say this is an area that comes up constantly in my work with travel companies. We run into this issue when companies ask whether the waiver should be separate outside of the terms and conditions, or whether the language should be within the terms and conditions. And my advice is typically, let's put it in a standalone waiver, and it's really because courts will look and see whether or not the language was conspicuous. If it's hidden among a bunch of other terms that are unrelated, if you're talking about luggage requirements in one paragraph, and the next paragraph is you waive all these rights if you're injured, courts don't like that. So you want the language to be conspicuous. You also want to make sure that the waiver is signed voluntarily. So this is where we get into questions about where to incorporate the waiver in your signing process. You do not want to give your travelers a waiver if you can help it. Certain activities, you might have to give a waiver at the last minute, but you want to give your traveler as much time as possible to review the waiver, sign the waiver. And that way you are strengthening your position and not undercutting yourself if you ever end up in court and a traveler says, hey, I didn't voluntarily sign this waiver because I got it when I was in no position but to sign it. It was under duress. So if you make sure, again, that your waiver is clear, conspicuous, and voluntary, you'll be in good shape. Now, a waiver, just having one, is not a magic wand that's going to make your legal disputes disappear. People can and do sue. If you're in business long enough, it may very well happen. But by having a waiver, you can deter lawsuits, hopefully, from the first place, make your case less attractive to a lawyer. You'll also, as I mentioned before, educate and screen out unsuitable participants. And you'll also provide yourself with a legal defense that a person entered into a contract with you and released you from liability. You will also have more evidence that a person assumed the risks of the activity. Now, it's important to remember that a waiver also does not release you from liability for everything. It's against public policy for people to waive instances of gross negligence or intentional misconduct. That is not what courts want to encourage, bad behavior. So those things cannot be waived away. Definition of gross negligence, it means something more than ordinary or a simple carelessness. It is something that is, sort of a reckless disregard of another person's welfare. Okay. With respect to a waiver, we'll spend a little time talking about core components. So you want to identify the inherent risks of your particular activities and include those in your waiver, and include clear language that talks about a release. So you want a clear release clause. You also want an acknowledgement of voluntary assumption of risk. There's also typically an indemnification clause, and this is where a traveler will be required to agree to pay for your defense costs as a travel company if they do anything that causes you to be sued. Another important provision is a forum selection or venue clause. So this is something that I think is often an oversight by companies. But if you're engaging in transactions with people all over the world and a dispute happens, the first question any lawyer will ask is where can the lawsuit be brought? And there are a number of factors that go into that determination. But one is, did the parties contractually agree to a particular place in a particular form? Arbitration versus court, what geography, what law will govern. So you want to address that in your waiver. In your waiver, you want to make sure that all of your business-related risk that can come up in any sort of lawsuit are covered, the core risks are covered. So really think about what type of risks your particular activities entail. Make sure those are covered. When I work with companies, we look and see what kind of activities are being provided: skydiving, kayaking, anything water related, wild animals, and make sure that that is incorporated into the waiver. With respect to the waiver, you want to make sure that it is clear and conspicuous by putting it into a standalone document if you can. A lot of companies don't like that. They don't feel like they don't want to scare away people, but that's actually the very point. You want people to really understand what rights they're giving away. And if you try to soften the language, make it less conspicuous, just understand that when a court scrutinizes the language and your waiver is not clear, or if it's sort of hidden, that's going to cut against you. Another tip on releases is to make sure that in your release language that your successors and assigns are listed as parties against whom travelers are waiving their rights. I often see waiver clauses that do not include successors and assigns. So this means if you sell your company, that waiver may not apply to the company that purchased yours. Or if you convert your entity into something else, that converted entity may not be covered. So be sure that the successors and assigns language is in there. Just doing a quick time check. So I will say with respect to, we can move on to slide 4, Brandon. Okay. Or the next slide. I will touch upon a couple of COVID-related concerns. So one, a big question is, should currently booked travelers sign some sort of new waiver for COVID? My point there would be, think about the purpose of having your travelers sign a new waiver. Is it to educate them about COVID-related risk, or is it to shield you from liability? If it's to shield yourself, then take a look at your current waiver. It might be good enough. If you want to educate the traveler about potential COVID risk, then you don't necessarily need to do that in a waiver. You could do it in your custom materials. You could put it on your website. So there are a lot of different ways to go about this. Just be sure to consult your attorney about that. The next question is about updating waivers. Do you need to create a new waiver? Again, I would say refer to your current waiver. I think a lot of people are getting into very specific questions about coronavirus particularly, but in writing a waiver, we typically want it to be evergreen, meaning, every new illness that comes about, we don't want to have to change your waiver. So look at your current waiver and make sure that it covers coronavirus type risk in a general way. And if it doesn't, then you'll want to update your waiver to make sure that it covers things like illness, viruses, pandemics, no matter if it's coronavirus or something else. So, if you have any questions about coronavirus, be sure to put them in the comments and we'll address them during the Q&A. And with that, I think we can move on to the next slide. So we wanted to take a quick poll with respect to the use of waivers and electronic waivers. So we wanted to find out whether people use digital signing services for their waivers or not. And the question is, do you use a digital signing service for your liability waivers and or other participant documents? So I think we're going to do a quick, Alice is doing a poll right now. You'll have the option to answer this yes or no. Or you don't know. Okay. And I'll just let you advance it or let us know when we can advance the slide. Alice? Okay.
Yeah, you can carry on, Junie.
Okay, great, thanks. So with that, I want to move on so that Brandon can get to his piece. But with respect to electronic signatures, I would say 10 years ago when I started working with the adventure travel industry, a big question was, well, are they lawful, meaning electronic signatures? My response was yes. Under the Uniform Electronic Signatures Act in the United States, it was passed in 1999. It's a federal law. Most states have adopted it or adopted their own version of the federal law, but electronic signatures are just as valid as pen and paper signatures. So I just saw the poll results come through. So 39% of you use a digital signing service, 58% do not, and 3% don't know. So I think that's encouraging. I think 10 years ago, that number would have been even less than the yeses. So it's good to see that more and more people are using digital signing services. So I'd say don't worry at all about whether an electronic or digital signature is just as valid. There's so many benefits to using an electronic signing service or digital service. I've been a big proponent of such services from the get-go. Literally, I talked to companies 10 years ago that were still storing paper waivers and putting them in attics. I think even now, like during coronavirus, where everybody's working remotely and you can't get to the office, yet you still want to take bookings. The last thing you want is, people sending around paper or confronting those issues, putting them in the attic or storage space. As a lawyer, when I come to you, if there's a lawsuit, my first question will be, well, did they sign a waiver and where is it? And if you cannot easily get your hands on a copy of it, then that's a problem. So we just on this slide put all the various benefits of electronic signatures. They're just so much easier for your staff to administer. They're easier for customers. It saves you an extraordinary amount of time as a business. Much easier to store, easier to locate. If we ever have a court case, reduces cost. You don't have storage cost. And I actually think moving to a more digital footprint, I think everybody's looking at this right now, is you look a lot more professional. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brandon.
Hey, thanks, Junie. So I want to talk a little bit about our partnership with ATTA. I think, being an ATTA member, which we've been, as Shannon mentioned, for, I don't know, probably 15 plus years. I think we went to the very first ATTA event that ever occurred. And I appreciate, the advice of Junie. I've listened to her at conferences in Mexico and all kinds of places, and always appreciate the advice we get, because no matter how long we've had a waiver in place, there's always room for improvement, I think, and little reminders that we certainly had a little wake-up call in our language, which we thought was pretty solid. And this whole COVID thing hit, and we were among those who did not do a very good job with one of our waivers having the language about disease and pandemic and all of those things. And we ended up having to create another document that our guests are signing before they come and participate. So, but now it's all tightened up. So there's always room for improvement. So I really appreciate all those thoughts, Junie. It's great to think through this and take some time to invest in our business that way. So let's move on with so talking about this partnership with ATTA. Before I get into that, I'll give a little background about WaiverSign so everybody knows kind of how this got started. So our story doesn't begin with software. It actually begins in the middle of Grand Canyon. Nearly 60 years ago, a company called Western River Expeditions pioneered the concept of rafting vacations. This guy right here is my father. And it was back in 1977 when my dad, together with two other partners, purchased Western River Expeditions. And so I've literally grown up in the business. There I am on Green River when I was a little guy. And I rafted with my family every summer to guiding in my early 20s and went off and did a few other things and came back to work in the business. And today we're very fortunate to be able to say that Western River Expeditions has become one of the largest rafting companies in the world. We offer trips in Grand Canyon, the Pacific Northwest, Costa Rica, and southern Utah. This is one of my all-time favorite trips through Desolation Canyon. That's actually me and my oldest son right there. And we've, in our business, we've always focused on perfecting the guest experience. And for a long time, that was our interaction on the phones and with guides and all of those things we think of when we think of the guest experience. But the reality is today, a really important portion of the guest experience happens through technology as guests interacts with our companies. It's kind of like Junie said, that professional image that we present, right? And it's sometimes a first impression with our reservation systems, our waivers. Those are the things that people are interacting with before they even see a person. And so for Western River, the collection of our documents back, 10, 12 years ago was something that I saw was becoming a real pain for not just for our guests, but also for our staff. We had years of boxes stored with signed waivers. Now, I wish I could say it looked this organized, but it probably looked a little more like this. And Junie's probably gonna look at that and go, what? Not actually ours, but it's a representation, I think, of a lot of times how we store these things, right? And you end up in a problem, and you go to find this thing, and you go, oh my gosh, how am I going to find this? So we said we've got to make this easier. We've got to make it a bit more organized, and we've got to find a way to improve our guest experience, because the idea of printing and signing and faxing and emailing and taking a photo and sending with your phone, whatever, there's too many formats, and it just didn't work. So we began working with insurance companies and attorneys like Junie to develop an online process. We wanted a process that would work well for our company, but also for the rest of the travel industry. So after a year or two of development and testing, WaiverSign was born. And today, as Shannon mentioned, we're very excited to introduce a partnership with ATTA. So I'm going to talk through the details of how the system works, but I just wanted to let everyone know kind of what you can expect from this before we get into some of the details. So this applies to ATTA members, and when we say ATTA members, we're talking about both paid businesses members as well as free community members. So they've opened it up to everyone. Now, each of you will get access to a WaiverSign account for just $10 per month. And that subscription gives you 100 signed waivers per month, and anything that you sign beyond that for waivers or other documents will be only 10 cents per signed documents. That's the collection and the storage of that document forever. And you'll also get unlimited users. So if multiple people in your business need to log in and see this, you can do that. You have unlimited waiver templates, and we'll talk about what that means here in a second, but that might be, you maybe have different documents. It's not just your liability waiver you want people to sign, but you want them to sign your terms and conditions or other important participant agreements. You can set up as many as you want in your account. Unlimited storage. If you have multiple locations, you can use it at all your locations. And you get access to our great support team to help with all of that as well. So I'm going to give you just a quick overview of this, and then I'm actually going to show you a live example from an ATTA member. So let's go through a few things. So when you log into your WaiverSign account, you'll see that you can create an unlimited number of documents, like I mentioned. This is helpful because, again, you might have your standard liability waiver. You might have, these are just examples that I have here in this sample company account. But you might have your terms and conditions here. You might have something related to COVID, like we had to put together. So any of these participant agreements can be stored in here. Each one of these documents can be customized in your own account. So to be clear, WaiverSign isn't something that provides, the waiver document for you. You work with someone like Junie or an attorney in your country to craft the document so it fits your business, the specifics of your business. So you can do that with each one of your documents. All the formatting tools and everything are there. And then you can actually select what information you want to collect. So all the standard fields are there, from email and first name and middle name, last name, gender, date of birth, all of those things that you'd expect. But you can also create custom fields if there's some additional information you need to collect from your participants. And then one really cool thing about WaiverSign is that you can determine what language to show on your liability waivers or other documents. So if you have somebody whose native language is not English, and you need to present the signing flow in Spanish and the document, you can work with someone to get that document in Spanish and then actually present it to your participants that way. The other thing that the system does that's maybe a little different than other processes we might try to use online is it actually facilitates the signing of adults and minors with the ability to customize the age for when a minor is no longer a minor, when they become an adult. You can actually plug all of that into the system, and when it asks for dates of birth and so forth, it will validate everything and make sure that parents are signing for minors when that needs to happen. Each time a waiver or other agreement is signed, a copy of the signed agreement is actually sent to the participant, and you can trigger a notification to yourself as well. And I think this is helpful going along with what Junie mentioned as far as getting that in front of them in advance. Not only do they sign before they show up, but they've had ample time to review it again because it's been sent to them in their email. And then once you have signed agreements, signed waivers or other agreements, you can log into your WaiverSign account and you'll see all the documents that have been signed there. So within a couple of seconds, literally, you can look up any participant's name, open up the signed document. They show up as PDFs, and we'll look at all of that here in just a second. So I wanted to show an example. Chalo Africa is actually a client of Junie's and a client of WaiverSign, and so we thought, well, it would be a fun one to show here. So I want to just take a minute and go in directly into their account. Now I'm just logging in here on a separate screen. What I've got on the screen here that you're seeing is actually the landing page, and we'll come back to this in a second here, but the landing page for ATTA members. So you can actually come here and review everything about the partnership and learn a little bit more about the things we've talked about. So if I've been going kind of quickly through this, you can come in here and review exactly what it is that you get. Some of the advantages to WaiverSign and so forth. We've got features all spelled out here. And then at the very bottom, you've got a form that you can fill out. And there's no commitment initially. You can plug your stuff in here even if you just want to come in and see it. We'll set up your document. You can look at it live. We can put your company branding around it, and you'll see all of that. And I think that's really helpful for companies to see. So let me go ahead, and I'm just going to pop this up here. So I'm in the Chalo Africa account here, and I just want to talk about kind of how they're using this really briefly. So in their case, they have two documents. These are documents that I think Junie helped put together for them. liability release, and their terms and conditions. So, and again, each one of these is unique to each business, so you can come in and you can see how they've customized it. Their starting adult age is 18. We have some settings here. And then all of the fields, they've chosen what they want to display, what's required, what's optional. They don't have any custom fields. And then they have the people who are getting notified down here. So I basically we create these documents, and then we go in to get a signing link. And this is something you really only do once in WaiverSign. I'm in this sandbox environment. I'm going to go ahead and close that here. So I'm going to say I want people to sign both of these simultaneously, which is a nice little advantage to how WaiverSign works. So I can copy this link, and we can pop up here. And this is a link I could be sending out in my confirmation emails to people, any way to direct them to it. This WaiverSign is connected to a broader reservation system called ResMark as well, and all of this is automated through that system. If that's something you're interested in looking at, but this can easily be used with any process that you use for reservations. So I'm going to go ahead just so you can see how it works with parent, guardian, and minors. So I'll just make it simple. We'll just say I'm traveling with my son, and I'll plug in my information here. And we have a date of birth. And then we'll plug in the information here for my son. Okay, so we plugged in, and if it was multiple minors, I'd fill them all in. And now it's going to utilize that information on the next steps of signing my documents. So here it's saying I need to sign a liability release in terms and conditions for myself and a liability release in terms and conditions for my son. And it facilitates all of this back to back, so it's really straightforward and easy. And you can see some of their branding up here that lives through the whole process. So we come through, this is their liability waiver. We've read through all of that. We see our information here, and again, you can collect as much information as you feel you need for each of these participants. And I'm applying my signature on behalf of the minor here as well. So I've applied it for me, I've applied it for the minor. I submit this document, and then the next document comes in. And this process would just be repeated for as many participant agreements as you need to facilitate. And Junie did a great job putting this one together. All of the stuff we needed in ours before. And we apply our signature here, and again, apply our signature for the minor. We agree, and now I've actually had all of these documents signed, so a document for me and my son, the liability release, and the terms and conditions for me and my son. I hit done, and I'm back to the beginning. So what I can see here with this is if I come into an email here, I can see that my documents are all here, and some of their notifications are triggering here as well. But if I wanted to view a signed document, I can see those. And so as the participant, I've received that. As the company, I may have received a notification as well. So I'll pop into one of these just so you can see what it looks like. We'll look at a PDF here. I'll zoom in just a bit so you can see it. So you can see each of these has the participant's name, a document ID that's stored, the signing date and timestamp, the IP address of the computer it was signed with. All of that language is here that they can review again, their signature, and all of that same stuff that was up in the top header as well. So that's kind of a little bit of how that process works. And hopefully that, let me just pop back over to our presentation here. So hopefully that helps to kind of see how that process works. I know for Tanvi was going to actually try to join us today. it's a little bit late in India where she's from right now. So she said, here, you can mention this to the other ATTA members. So these are some of her thoughts. She had mentioned that the process for them, they were having all these documents come in different forms, pictures, scans, emailed, faxed, all these different methods that they were receiving their liability waivers. And they had to, conform that into their system of and keep track of it. So now they can send a single link like we just looked at. The guest can sign both the terms and conditions and the liability release. And it's just made their lives a lot simpler and everyone else's. So hopefully that helps to kind of see a review of what that is. Again, for everyone's benefit, you have this great membership benefit from the Venture Travel Trade Association, again, available to both the paid business members as well as free community members. And if that's something that interests you, you can get onto waiversign.com/ATTA, that page that I showed a little bit earlier, and you can fill out that form. That form will actually ask you to upload your document. You can upload a Word document or a PDF, and we'll take that and digitize it for you and then show you what the process looks like digitally. So I think that's all I have on my part. Alice, if there's been some questions that have come in, maybe we can jump into those and either Junie or I can dive in and help answer.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brandon, and thank you, Junie. What an organized and well-described outline of a fairly complicated and what could probably be called a dry topic. Thank you for making it digestible and also interesting at the same time. We do have a fair amount of questions that have come in, so I'll go ahead and start reading those off to you guys. And why don't you, Brandon, while you're doing that, go ahead and throw up your contact details, you and Junie. Sure. And if anyone needs to jump off before the top of the hour, they can follow up with you directly if they have questions that they don't get answered through this process. But we have about 15 minutes, so we'll get through as many questions as we can. All right, this one is from Anonymous. Can a digital waiver signing occur at the initial deposit transaction and trip sign-up stage? And can one person sign on behalf of the whole family they're signing up and paying deposits on? So 2 questions in one. Let's start with Junie.
Okay, so I'll take the second question there, which is, can one person sign on behalf of the whole family that they are signing up and paying deposits on? So great question. I've actually looked at all the questions so far, and they're all the common questions I'm asked by companies like yours. So in my terms and conditions that I work with on clients, we do have a paragraph that says something like, by making a deposit on behalf of a whole group, you are agreeing to the terms for the whole group. That's really a belt and suspenders approach for the terms. We prefer that everybody signs the terms separately. But with respect to the waiver, you really don't want one person signing a waiver for everybody. I will tell you that a court will look at that and will not uphold the waiver that somebody else has signed. Let's say for me, I needed to have signed and read that waiver. So if you're thinking about just having one person sign a waiver for a bunch of people, don't do it. You can, it's just not helpful. It might give you, a little bit of peace of mind that maybe some travelers know about the risk, perhaps, but that's not the way to go. And Brandon, maybe you want to do the first part?
Yeah. So as far as timing, when do you put this? You put it during the booking process? Do you put it afterwards? And while you could present a link to go out and sign the documents during the booking process, what we've seen, just from experience watching companies do it different ways, is that it's far more effective afterwards. When you think about the booking process, imagine yourself, creating a reservation for, whatever it is, travel, flights, anything, and you had to have every member of your family that you were booking at that moment come and sign the document. It's likely they're not sitting next to you. And so you end up with this kind of hurdle to get to the payment process, which is ultimately what you want. You want the booking and you want to collect a deposit and confirm that booking, right? That's like step number one. And so when you put too many hurdles in place towards that, we've just seen it creates a higher abandonment rate of the actual purchase process, and can kind of hinder that a little bit. Plus, or you end up with what Junie was touching on, where somebody goes, oh, whatever, they're not here next to me, I'm just going to sign all these documents for everyone in my party, because it's highly unlikely they're all sitting together, gathered around the computer, booking. So I think it's best to get the booking process completed, and then serve up the documents that you need in a confirmation email or something that happens afterwards.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up to that. Is there anything legally binding that is relevant to that conversation if they sign it before or during the activity?
That might be a question on your part. I know we've talked about, some attorneys have counseled in our own business to at least reference, that these, terms and conditions and, liability waivers we do require each participant to sign before they participate, and we will be sending those to you. We've made a reference to it during the booking process, but considered it unrealistic to have every single person sign before they can complete a booking. But Junie, what's your thought on the legal side?
Yeah, I thought, is this the question? I see a question here that I think touches on that issue, which is about the snorkeling. Is that it? Okay, so the question is a waiver for a specific activity like snorkeling legally binding if the traveler signs it before they travel, or does a waiver of this kind need to be signed while on the trip? So again, remember the waiver has to meet a bunch of other conditions in order to be legally binding, but I think this goes to the timing. So the question is, does the traveler know about the risk, and do they release you from those risks? So the sooner you can get that in front of a traveler, the better, to avoid an argument in court that they signed the waiver under duress. So if you can get the waiver in front of the snorkeler well in advance, great. That would be the best thing to do. I wouldn't wait until the trip unless, this is really for walk-up people. So like, I'm a diver. I've gone into plenty of dive shops, decide at the last minute that I'm going to go diving. And so I go ahead and sign at the dive shop and jump on a boat 30 minutes later. That's okay. I mean, that's the nature of the beast. But for trips, get in front of your people sooner. And the fact that the snorkeling happens, let's say 2 months later, it's not really an issue.
Thank you so much. Great. There's another one somewhat related to that from someone who is currently including the requirement of waiver completion as terms and conditions of the booking request and confirmation. Then they track and require a signature before departure. And this person's asking, is that best practice, or should the waiver be signed in conjunction with agreeing to the terms and conditions? It sounds like you're doing right there.
Yeah, this is a good question. It always goes back to this timing. I think, Brandon, you touched upon it. Like, do you just inundate the traveler with a bunch of documents right at booking? Sometimes it's not that practical. In a perfect world, the traveler would get all the documents at once. So, when they give you the money, they know what they're signing up for. I can tell you the reality is some companies do it at the time of booking, like provide all the documents. Everyone has to sign up at booking. Or some go ahead and take the booking deposit and say, hey, look, you need to sign these documents before you could go on the trip, and then provide the links a short time later. In those situations, we've had some scenarios where a traveler comes and says, I don't want to sign the liability waiver. They have questions about it. And in that circumstance, I think you have to be ready as a business owner just to say, okay, fine, I'll give a refund, because, you're in that position of, if you ever end up in court, the person will say, look, I paid the money and they forced me to sign the waiver. And you don't want that. So you just want, let them back out of the deal. But to minimize that from happening, I would say, even if you don't collect the signature at booking, you can put a notice saying, here's our liability waiver, like make it easily accessible so that if somebody does want to read it before they book, they've got a copy, they can get to a copy.
It may not be something they're signing right there, just a reference to it to say, am I okay with all of the risks that they've specified here?
Exactly. But in my experience, it's not a common problem that somebody, books, reads the liability waiver, and then wants to back out. And if they do, they're not the right person for the trip.
Yes.
Thank you. That's great. So I think we've covered the question of timing, reading through the questions and trying to see what naturally falls up next, which is a question about the waiver itself and language to include or sections to include in waivers. I will mention a shameless plug that for ATTA professional and business members, there are some legal document templates that you have access to as part of your ATTA member benefits. These are templates only. Obviously, you'll want to customize them for your own business. I'll share a link to those here in the chat in just a sec, but this question was for Chuni. Do you recommend requirement to initial short signature sections of terms and waivers throughout, as opposed to a single signature at the very end exclusively? And I would say, the follow-up for Brandon, what does that look like in the digital sense?
Again, I think it depends on what your waiver looks like. I think it depends on the law of your jurisdiction. This was something commonly done in the past on paper where people are looking at waivers and it was just easy to initial paragraph by paragraph. But, I would say it's not necessarily a common practice. Sometimes companies would have like the release language, right? The language that says, I release travel company A from, any and all damage for anything that might happen to me on a trip. Companies would have the traveler just initial that paragraph just to really rebut any claim that the traveler did not understand that release was in there. But that said, I don't think it's necessary in every case. I think you just show that, look, the person got the waiver, it's conspicuous, it was a standalone, there was a big title that says this is a release of liability. There's no way they could have missed that. And they clearly agreed to a release. So I would say, I wouldn't recommend that just as a matter of course.
And to answer that question on the digital side, WaiverSign does have those capabilities. So you can do three things really with the document. The ones we saw in like the Chalo Africa account were more of just a straightforward, all of the language with the signature at the bottom. If your legal counsel was saying, hey, you really need to call out a certain section or paragraph of the document and you want to have an initial on that, then you can actually create sections inside WaiverSign. So, and you can require initials. The third thing you can do there is have an accept decline clause. So I know some people in equestrian or horseback riding arenas will have like a helmet clause, right, where you can either accept or decline on the document whether you're choosing to wear a helmet or not. And then they can track all of that and say, right here, this participant declined wearing a helmet, and they assumed the risks of doing so that were written right here. And so a few different things that you can do digitally that make that process really easy.
Great. Thank you so much. One last question for Chuni, and then we're going to move into a few questions directly about WaiverSign. Okay. This one is, where'd it go? How long should waivers be kept for? Signed waivers in your records.
Yes. Again, it depends. So it depends on the statute of limitations for someone to bring a lawsuit against you. That varies by state. So let's say, for instance, in your state, it's 5 years that somebody has to sue you for wrongful death or injury. Then you want to be sure that you keep it for at least 5 years. But given this global arena, you could be sued in a number of other jurisdictions or abroad. So I would say, I would keep it longer than that. The other wrinkle there is that minors can potentially, in certain jurisdictions, retain the right to sue when they become of age. So let's say when they're hurt when they're 10 years old, they could potentially sue you when they become an adult of 18. They retain the right to sue you until adulthood. So that would extend the period. So again, I think you have to look at your state laws. I would say just a few years would be too short. Give yourself the outside of time. I would say, if you haven't heard from somebody in 10 plus years, then, you could probably be okay. But again, I hate to generalize here. So look at your local laws.
That's why you have those stacks of boxes that go on and on and on after years of operation.
Yeah.
Right, which is crazy. We still have to keep them, even though we've been using digital for a long time now. We still have our old boxes from 10 plus years ago of liability waivers that were signed.
Safety first. This person says, great information, thank you. And WaiverSign looks perfect for our needs. Are there digital signing methods to avoid that would not be considered legally binding?
That might be more of a Chuny question.
Yeah, this is like another kind of depends thing. I don't, digital signing methods. I'm assuming this means like to check the box or things like that.
So like write with your finger or click a button that applies a signature. Those are all different methods we see out there today.
Yeah, and again, it depends on the jurisdiction. I mean, the reality is, as long as someone indicates some sort of assent to a document, that's best. Sometimes check boxes, other ways of signing are a little, could potentially be vulnerable. But there are different methods of signing. So again, another area that I can't generalize. But a signature is really the best. Is the strongest position to be in, is having a signed waiver versus like a checkbox.
Yeah. And WaiverSign, to touch on what we do, I mean, ours kind of combines the two. So it creates a signature, because so many people have such a hard time. You've seen on, you've probably all done it, where you go to sign with your mouse and all you get out of your signature is a, I try to create a B for my name and it looks like some kindergarten drawing of something or worse. And so that's why we'll store the IP address, the timestamp, all the personal information that person entered, and then we create the signature for them, and then they apply that signature. So that's what we've chosen to do. And we found that that's, for most people, from a technical standpoint, that works well, whether you're on your laptop or an iPad or your phone, whatever device you might be signing on, it just makes it quick and easy for them.
Great. Well, we are running up against the top of the hour, but we have a handful more questions. Chuny and Brandon, can you hang on for?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Great. I think these are good questions to answer too. So if you do need to leave, thank you for joining us today. The recording with the rest of these questions will be available, so you can check those out if you're waiting for something you asked to be answered. Check that out when you get the recording. Okay, quickly, what is the contractual period for WaiverSign? I.e., for seasonal activities, we might not operate during certain times of year. Would we still pay monthly for off-season times? Brandon.
Yeah. Great question. So I'll answer it in two parts. The first one, contractual obligation. It's just a month-to-month subscription. So you're not signing up for an annual subscription or anything like that. You can utilize it, for as long as it works for you. If you choose to terminate your subscription, you can go in and download all of your documents, because keep in mind, as you're paying for it, you're also paying for the storage of those documents and access to them. But if you do say, hey, we're moving to a different solution, or this didn't work for us for whatever reason, then you can export documents, find a good place that you feel comfortable storing all of those. They would be downloaded like as PDF files for all of your participants. And then you would store those on your own somewhere. As far as seasonality, that's a question, Alice, that we get a lot. You can do a couple of things. I mean, a lot of companies find that as they start using it, you'd pay the minimum of the $10 a month going through the off season. But they do find that often they like, the simple storage and the access and so forth to those documents during that time. If you really wanted to avoid, the $10 for 5 or 6 months or something like that, you could terminate your account, get the documents, and then fire it back up again later on. So we've just tried to make it really affordable from that standpoint of just the ongoing storage. Plus, we also find that generally, especially for the types of trips that ATTA members book, and I'm putting myself into this with like putting on my Western River hat, I mean, we're booking all year long. So which means we're signing all year long. We're collecting signatures all year long as well. You know, if somebody calls me in January and they want to make a booking for the summer, I want to be able to take it, and I'd like to give them their waiver document immediately following their booking. I don't want to wait, you know, until trips are starting in April and then start handing out links to sign documents, you know, right before a trip. Again, just going back to what Junie had mentioned about giving them that time in advance to say, yeah, I feel good about what I'm going to engage in the months to come. So hopefully that kind of answers that.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And here's another on the WaiverSign system. Is there a family or group booking option? So it kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier about signing on behalf of other people.
Yeah, and that's where I think a solution like that really shines. It has, I kind of showed in that Cello Africa example, and I just made it simple, but I signed for one minor, right? You could have, I have 4 kids, for example, and I could plug in so that, you know, I'm signing for myself and my 4 children as the apparent guardian, and I'm plugging all of them in. So it works really well for family situations. If you're a family-oriented company, it's, you know, if you're just booking, the majority of your bookings are adults and so forth, then like parties that are split up, you know, between different adults in one booking, you can send that out, and then we'll generally say in an email, you know, share this link with other members of your party who also need to sign. So you don't get me booking and then signing for, you know, a bunch of friends that are traveling with me. They just simply pass that on, and all the friends come in and sign.
Great.
Yep.
Fantastic. And someone said, sorry if I missed this, can documents be uploaded with forms?
Can documents be uploaded? So say you're scanning your old documents and you want to put them into the cloud to store alongside your other ones. That's something we do get asked sometimes. We don't currently have a feature that does that, but it may be something we consider in the future. We'd need a way to not just upload them, but also provide the participant information with it, so that you could still search for an old document, because that's the real key to the digital system, that I can go in and I can look up Brandon Lake, boom, there's all my records and history, and I can see, you know, all of the documents that I've signed over time, even if I've come back year after year, and each one of those that I've signed. And it does, I guess one other thing to add to that, Alice, too, I mentioned the as you think about collection and storage and so forth, the WaiverSign solution does, like if you're using the entire suite of the product, which is our ResMark booking system, then you can handle bookings, and then the system will actually automatically send out emails. And if someone hasn't signed later on, it will actually know that and continue to remind them about collecting a signature. So that can become really helpful too as you're leading up to departure.
You read my mind. That was the next question. There were 2 questions about tracking clients, making sure that they have submitted their signed waivers. If it's doing it automatically and sending them reminders, that's great. That's part of WaiverSign, or that's part of ResMark?
That's part of utilizing the 2 together. It'll actually know, because you need to have the travel date, you know, submitted with it, and then it can actually fire off those reminders as you lead up to it.
Got it. So if you're only using WaiverSign, would you need to track manually which ones haven't signed?
Yeah, you would track some of that and potentially automate, you know, when that goes out from, you know, from another system, that you could say, hey, we're approaching departure, and, you know, utilizing a flag maybe in your system that says you've collected documents for each one of your participants.
Got it.
And if that flag's not collected, it could fire off a message with the WaiverSign link.
Excellent. So much technology. Speaking of, is there API integration for WaiverSign?
Yes, there is an API, and our sales team can help walk through that if that's something you're interested in looking at.
Great. All right. Here is another question that is kind of the question of the hour. Brandon, what are the main differences between this and a service like DocuSign?
Good question. So DocuSign is built, we probably all use DocuSign, right, for one reason or another. And generally, DocuSign, you find that you're uploading custom agreements. I always use the example of like real estate agreements, right? Because maybe I'll utilize DocuSign for that purpose. And so you have a real estate agreement that's very specific, and it has, the address name, all the inclusions, the two parties that are signing, and you're generally collecting signatures from both parties in a DocuSign sense, right? The buyer, the seller, that sort of thing. Where in WaiverSign, there are two fundamental differences from DocuSign. One is that you're signing the same document every time, whether it's your liability waiver, it's your terms and conditions. It really doesn't differ unless you make an edit to it, and the next time you serve it up, it's the new document. But you're having this thing signed over and over, and you're generally not collecting the signatures of both parties. I'm not party to that as Western River Expeditions, and then my guest is signing it also. I don't need to serve it up like that. It's just, that process comes through. And I guess one other difference would be the whole concept of adults and minors. You don't see that working really well with DocuSign unless you serve up like this is my agreement for adults and minors, and this is my other agreement, and people have to kind of pick and choose which thing that they're signing and so forth. So it's just built for this specific niche of agreements, right? Which lends itself well to waivers. It lends itself well to terms and conditions. Really a lot of the participant type agreements that we have in the travel space in particular.
Thank you. We've had a few folks chime in to clarify what they were asking about. Just the quick one about uploading documents as part of the waivers. She says, if we ask for a passport, for example, with the form.
Oh, okay. So participants uploading their documents as part of the signature process. Okay. No, it does not facilitate that. You can ask for, custom information if you did want to store, certain identification information like a passport number or something like that. You could get into that, and always something to discuss with your attorney about the type of information you're collecting and how you're collecting it and so forth in regards to when you start thinking about passports and other information like that.
Yeah, are there, following up on that, and this may be where Chuni can chime in, it says we currently use our risk and liability waiver to also collect mandatory emergency contact details, and we state this up front. Any issues collecting those details within the document and getting a signature simultaneously?
Yeah, great question. And I think this goes to that issue of conspicuousness. So I would say here, for expediency, I don't see an issue with collecting that information, but keeping it brief. The thing you want to be careful of is just, piling up a ton of things in the waiver so that it gets confusing for the traveler, and it's just too much in there, and it makes you vulnerable to this conspicuous argument that it's inconspicuous and therefore an unenforceable waiver. But, if you're just saying, hey, who's your emergency contact, that's fine.
Well, one thing we've tried to do with that, Alice, is on the, again with the whole integrated suite, on the ResMark side, we collect all of the things that are needed for a booking there, whether it's dietary requirements, emergency contact, all the stuff that you need, heights and weights and, all of that kind of stuff. And then we click a button and go into the waiver process. And we take with us the participant information that it's needed on the waiver, which is first name, last name, date of birth, that pertinent information to the signature process, and we utilize that in the document. So it kind of allows you to draw that line a little bit and create less confusion about what the purpose of the document is.
Great. Just 3 last questions, and hopefully we can burn through them and then call it a day. It appears there is at least some personally identifiable information in such waivers and other forms that emailing that sensitive content may be inadvisable. Are there other more secure ways to receive notifications? It's a good question. How secure is WaiverSign is probably at what this might be getting at.
Yeah, and we're continually working with that type of information and trying to make sure that everything is stored as securely as possible and working with CUNY and others on those very things. And so it's, it's a good question in terms of, and I think each business kind of has to look at what are they collecting, what fields have they chosen to collect, how are they receiving those notifications, how does their email service work. There's other things around that sometimes just with your own business use and how you access and store data and so forth. So probably more of an individual question, for each business to kind of look at with their scenario. But from a WaiverSign perspective, we do try to really stay on top of that as well. Junie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is, this is a great question in terms of raising the topic of privacy, which is beyond the scope of today. But I would just say for everybody that's still on the call, this is a big issue. California new privacy law went into effect this year. There's the EU privacy law. There are going to be more and more of these privacy issues coming up. So at some point, this might be a good time, really look at what you're doing from a privacy practices standpoint, put certain things in place, and investigate cyber security insurance. As you guys become more and more remote, getting a lot of information remotely, this is going to be, I think, an insurance area that's going to be key for you. Okay.
Great.
Good point. And I went ahead and copied some recommendations from another listener here into the chat who had some comments on that as well. And then quickly, just touching again on the Resmark and WaiverSign relationship, Brandon, it said, how does payment from the client as they're booking the tour work electronically? And is it in conjunction with WaiverSign or separately via electronically?
Yeah, so the booking part of this that I've referenced a couple of times today happens separately. So you would go through, collect the deposit or final payment, whatever that might be, and then the waiver piece is served up separately. But the two work together really nicely, I guess. So you're not, I'm not sure I'm exactly following that, but the payment and the waivers aren't necessarily connected in that sense. You're collecting the booking, the information for that, and the payment, and then you're collecting the signatures. And each time someone signs, all of the information you collect on that waiver, whether it's, first name, last name, date of birth, address, all of that is inserted into the booking. So you've got, on your manifest with all of your guests, you now have a complete, data for each one of them stored in the system.
Got it. Great. And that works fairly well with other booking systems as well?
It may entail an integration with other booking systems. What we've referenced today is more of a, take that and fire it off in your confirmation email. If you're utilizing another booking system, you could still utilize WaiverSign that way.
Great. Okay, last question, and then we'll wrap it up. This is probably fairly relevant. What if my company works with a local tour operator and we both have waivers? Do all the participants need to sign all of the waivers from both companies?
Again, I am loving all of these great questions. So thanks everyone for giving me some of these softballs and hardballs. So this one is, companies do come to me with this question, and it's a bit of a dance to figure out how to set up the workflow in a way that makes sense for the tour operator, the supplier, and the traveler. And it can get tricky sometimes. It really depends. In some situations, tour operators don't want too many waivers put in front of the traveler, but that's a tricky proposition because as a tour company, if you have a waiver, it will typically say you're not responsible for anything that a supplier does. It's a bit rich to then tell the traveler, go after the supplier after they've signed both of your waivers, right? But I think this, again, to answer the process question, your supplier is going to want a waiver if your waiver doesn't cover them, which is a fair point. So I guess the short answer would be yes, if you want your travelers to indemnify and release you, and if your supplier wants the same, then both of those waivers need to be put in front of the traveler. Or you have to have a combined one. So one option might be if you have a really good supplier, you might want to name them specifically in your waiver as being a covered entity. You can do that. You may not want to do it from your particular business standpoint. It depends on your circumstances. But there are a few different ways to handle this. But you could do that. Have your traveler sign both waivers, or have one waiver cover you both.
And we've generally, in our travel business, Junie, we've tried to do that option where we only have one waiver. I've often heard other attorneys at a conference or something talk about how you may end up in court with a conflict between the two documents, right? And they're both saying completely different things, and yet they've signed both, and now they both get thrown out. And so, you can't utilize it as a defense, and that's always kind of worried me. So we've said, well, if we're going to we work with a supplier in Idaho on some of our rafting trips, for example, and we'll have, we actually put their document into WaiverSign, and we serve that up and then send them a copy when it's signed. And that works out pretty well also, if we're selling one of their trips. And we are specifically mentioned in that document as our company. And so we've kind of done that combined approach, and we've just done it with a single document. And that, to me, that's always felt really clean.
Yeah. And there's so many variations. I mean, I like this question because it's it is a puzzle, and there are a lot of scenarios. But if you have a white label situation, it gets even trickier.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're dealing with, I think somebody Anna put a question or put a comment in here about their particular waiver requirements in their country. But the conflict issue might be tricky in some situations to resolve, because the laws may be quite different, and there really is no middle ground that you can achieve in a particular waiver. But you might have one waiver that is a U.S. waiver that covers the supplier if they're ever sued in the United States. So at least from a legal standpoint in the United States, they're covered. But this is where I say, talking to a lawyer and puzzling through those relationships, the interplay of the different laws will be really important.
Great advice as always. Well, thank you everybody for hanging on an extra 20 minutes. Fantastic questions. And thank you, Junie, and thank you, Brandon, for taking the time with us today to dig through all of this stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, as a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and will be available in the hub along with a copy of the slides within a few days. We'll also send that link out via email to all of you who registered. Thanks for hanging on here to the bitter end, everyone. And of course, if you're looking for details about the new ATTA member benefit or custom digital and contactless waivers with WaiverSign, you will be able to find it inside the hub as well. And we've linked to it in the chat box. Of course, you probably already received an email about it as well. But of course, we like to share the love. So if you, last plug, you or the right members of your staff are not yet signed up to receive our news, Adventure Travel News, you can subscribe to that to receive invitations to these and future webinars and virtual events and research reports when they're available and all sorts of great stuff. So one more mention is that if you particularly loved learning from Junie today, as I always do, no offense, Brandon, you too, of course. But last week we had another Meet the Experts webinar on travel insurance, which touched on some of these very interesting customer-oriented challenges as well. So go ahead and tune into that recording of that webinar, which is in the hub already. Thank you all again for coming today. Stay well, and we'll see you next time.